Born in 1914 to an affluent Mexican family, Octavio Paz was a truly revolutionary thinker. Throughout his long life, he was actively involved in poetry, politics, and spent his life in a state of constant self-reinvention. His contributions to Mexico are numerous, including time spent abroad as an ambassador to India, achieving a Nobel Prize, and through his famous analysis of the Hispanic psyche, The Labyrinth of Solitude. A truly prolific writer, Octavio Paz penned over 30 books. One of the most prominent themes in his work was this question of existentialism. That is, he is primarily concerned with what it means to be a human being. Existentialists ask big questions like, how should humans live their lives? What gives our lives meaning? Do we have free will? Some existentialists, like Fyodor Dostoevsky and Soren Kierkegaard, were concerned about the human condition in light of an all-knowing, all-powerful God. They asked questions like, how and why does God allow evil? Do we truly have free will if God knows what we are going to do? And how do we make sense of a God that is incomprehensible to us? On the other hand, we have existentialists like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, who are decidedly and staunchly atheist. In light of their atheism, they asked questions like, how do we give our lives a meaning in a world without God? That is, a world without inherent meaning. Where do we derive our morality from if there is no objective truth to dictate it? How do we make sense of an absurd, meaningless world?
Our time is simplistic, superficial, merciless. Having fallen into the idolatry of ideological systems, our century has ended by worshiping things. What place does love have in such a world?
Octavio Paz occupied a somewhat unique position amongst existentialists. While he did not prescribe to any one set religion, he also railed against the increasing objectification of humanity in the new era of scientific atheism. That is, he maintained a belief in the human soul and the inherent value of each individual person. Whether we can point to a soul or not in the world, each of us has the experience of having a unique, sensible experience. In one of his late great works, The Double Flame, Love and Eroticism, Paz argued that love and connection are some of the answers to these existential questions of meaning.
When I speak of the human person, I am not evoking an abstraction, but referring to a concrete reality. The soul, or whatever one chooses to call the human psyche, is not only reason and intellect, it is also a sensibility. The soul is bodily, sensation, which becomes emotion, sentiment, passion.
However, despite his belief in a soul or the experience of one, he did not believe in a God that created that soul. Instead, he seemed to view language as both our individual spirit and the universal whole that we're a part of. In being alive, we experience isolation and aloneness. But through life, through experiences and love and language, we become whole again.
When we were born, we were torn from wholeness, but this separation gives way to a new hope, the recovery of wholeness and the discovery of the self as wholeness within the great whole.
He says the beloved embrace of self-actualization is neither great nor small. It is the perception of all times, all lives in a single instant. To be human is to be divided, to experience inside and outside, body and soul, object and subject. Paz concludes The Double Flame with this.
We are the theater of the embrace of opposites and of their dissolution, resolved in a single note that is not affirmation or negation, but acceptance. What does the couple see in the space of an instant, a blink of the eye? The equation of appearance and disappearance, the truth of the body and the non-body, the vision of the presence that dissolves into splendor, pure vitality, a heartbeat of time.
Not only was Paz's vibrant existential viewpoint alive and well in his critical essays, it was also fully alive in his poetry as well. When reading Paz's poems, I often feel, more so than with other poets, that he is in fact, somehow, despite being dead for almost 2 decades, still present in his work. In some ways, this makes me think of his work in a sort of magical, mystical light, as if his poems were a sort of philosopher's stone, that old alchemist's magnum opus that allows one to achieve immortality. Consider his short poem, A Tree Within.
A tree grew inside my head. A tree grew in. Its roots are veins, its branches nerves, thoughts its tangled foliage. Your glance sets it on fire, and its fruits of shade are blood oranges and pomegranates of flame. Day breaks in the body's night. There, within, inside my head, the tree speaks. Come closer, can you hear it?
This short, surreal poem begins by presenting us with an arresting, opening image that calls to mind André Breton's initial vision of a man cut in two by a window. As we read on, there is a dreamlike blending of the imaginary tree and Paz's physical body into a greater sense of reality. It asks us, what really is the difference between our thoughts and our reality? This is immediately complicated by our own invitation into the poem, as Paz, almost through the page, calls out to us, reminds us that we, too, are an active participant in this poem's creation. It is our glance that gives this poem another life. We allow the tree, the poem inside Paz's head, to bear its marvelous, radiant fruit. This sort of magic is what Paz and his poetry is all about. The idea that we as readers play an active role in creating the poem is explored most heavily in Paz's great masterwork, Blanco. In the intro to this poem, Paz offers some explanation for his intentions for the work, which is presented slightly different in a book format than he had originally intended. Original versions of the text were limited to around 500 copies. Originally, the poem was published on a single long piece of paper, which you would open up and fold out. Original versions of this text were limited to around 500 copies. They sell for $6,000 and, for some reason, include a paper I published in my undergraduate in their item description. In his intro to Blanco, he says,
as the reading progresses, a space which, as it opens out, allows the text to appear and, in a certain sense, creates it. It is something like the motionless voyage offered by a roll of tantric pictures and emblems. As we unroll it, a ritual is spread out before our eyes, a sort of procession or pilgrimage. The typography and format of the original edition of Blanco were meant to emphasize not so much the presence of the text, but the space that sustains it, that which makes writing and reading possible, that in which all writing and reading end.
In my aforementioned essay, I argued against many critics who suggested that this space that makes reading and writing possible was not intended to be the objective world, as they argued, but rather that it was to emphasize our own role in the poem's creation. As we work through the poem, we create different versions of it with each new reading. There is no one true meaning or experience of Blanco. In the same way, there is no one true meaning to life. In each of us, there are infinite readings of Blanco. And yet, this does not mean that the poem is meaningless. With each reading, we travel through the poem and, in a very real way, in the most real, objective way, return to ourselves to find that we have changed, if we're open to seeing it. This idea of recreation, the unending process of new experiences, new readings, new connections, is core to Paz's philosophy and one of the most important things we can take away from his work. Paz says we seek to set out connections because
it is always difficult to give oneself up. Few persons anywhere ever succeed in doing so, and even fewer transcend the possessive stage to know love for what it actually is, a perpetual discovery, an immersion in the waters of reality, an unending recreation.
that is, we often feel estranged from ourselves, so we seek completion in religion, relationships, communities. But because of this estrangement, we are able over and over to come back to ourselves, to become someone both new and more like we've always been.
In every man there is the possibility of his being, or more exact, of his becoming once again, another man.